Okay, so we'll start with my first novel. I also feel like I need to explain myself because the things, like even all the things that even led up to Who Fears Death and beyond, there's so much to the things that I've kind of developed here, and I kind of want to tell the story of that so it all makes sense because there's a lot to this. So my first novel was published in 2005, and that was Zara the Windseeker. Before that, I spent 8 years just writing stories, novel after novel, without the intent of getting published at all. I was just enjoying and reveling in the act of writing stories. I remember I would finish a novel, like a whole novel, finished, edited over and over again, polished, perfected, and then the first thing I do is put it aside and then start another one. And I did that for 8 years. Zara the Windseeker was my might have been my fourth or fifth novel that I had written. So ever since I started writing, something that I started doing because of a trauma, I was a paralyzed athlete, and writing stories was a magical thing that pulled me from the abyss. I haven't had a plan. And that's one thing, and if you notice about this speech, no plan. And it works for me. But this whole planless existence for me really had to do with the way that I started writing. I haven't had a plan, a life plan, since the age of 19, when the plan that I did have was flat out destroyed and obliterated. So the way that I started writing in the first place was really something, because before I wrote my very first story, which was when I was, it was when I was 20, was like, I was not, before that, I hadn't written anything. I'd never written anything creatively. I'd never thought to write anything creatively. I came from a family where we were very medicine and science oriented. You did not go into the arts. That was very taboo to do such a thing. And I was an athlete as well. And so who knows the story of how I started writing? Do I need to tell that story? Okay, one person. Yeah, I need to tell this story. This story is very important because it comes back to every single thing that I've written since, everything. So yeah, before the age of 19, I hadn't written a thing creatively, ever. And I was an athlete. I played semi-pro tennis from the age of 9 to 19. And I also was a track and field. I did track and field. I won, in my senior year, I won over 22 medals. I did the 400, the 800, the long jump. I did the hurdles and the high jump. So very athletic. Both of my parents were athletes as well. So that was my identity. You know, I was an athlete, and I also was, my strongest subjects in school were in the sciences and math. So, and I wanted to be an entomologist. I love bugs. That's remained consistent from the beginning. I love bugs. I was that kid who would go into the bushes and forage for things and see what would jump up, catch it, bring it home, scare the hell out of my mom, and then classify whatever it was. That was my obsession. It was very strange. I've always been like that. Had a thing for grasshoppers. Yeah, that's from the beginning. I was known as the bug girl. So that was me, you know, that was my identity. Athlete, when I wasn't on the tennis court or on the track, I was in the library consuming books, stories after story, a lot of nonfiction as well, because I loved reading up on bugs. So, so that was me. Then when I was 13, I was diagnosed with scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine, which is very common. But my scoliosis was like crazy scoliosis. It was really severe. It progressed fast. At one point, I remember feeling it happening when I was 13. It was like my spine was it was straight, and then it was just going like that, and I could feel it. And it was during I was at a tennis match when that happened, and I remember going to the bathroom and just like, what is happening to me? I remember that. And so it didn't interrupt my sports. Played tennis, you know, like, man, I got to know the United States through tennis. Like, the first time I came to Denver was for a tennis tournament. So, yeah, so the scoliosis progressed. I was one of those kids who had to wear a back brace in high school. All of that didn't help. Nothing stopped this thing. It was just rabid. Both of my sisters have scoliosis. My younger brother has scoliosis. None of theirs was as severe as mine. So mine progressed, and I still played tennis. I still ran track, all that. I had no pain, no nothing. And then by the time I was 19, however, even though I was performing, I had just been named the Athlete of the Year in Illinois, Illinois' All-State Athlete of the Year. By that time, I had no pain, everything was fine, and then they took an x-ray of my spine, and the curvature was so incredibly severe. I mean, it looked like, I look at old pictures of myself, and I had like it looked like I was wearing a backpack. You know, I didn't look normal at all. I still don't, but back then it was really severe. And they were like, they said that, the doctors said that if I didn't have surgery for the scoliosis to correct that curvature, I would be crippled by the time I was 25, and my life would be significantly shortened. So there was a 1% chance of paralysis with this, and you're working with the spine, that is common, and 100% chance of being crippled. So it was an easy decision. Went in May 18th, and this was after my freshman year. I had been on the tennis team at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and I was a pre-med major. Went in, woke up 9 hours later, paralyzed from the waist down. So that was the beginning, because that was a shock. That was a shock to my whole entire system, to my whole entire being. If you take an athlete who can run faster than everybody, jump higher, walk on her hands, like walk a half mile on her hands, which I did once, you know, that athletic, that easy motion in space, like I could move really easily. You take that person and paralyze that person and put them in a hospital bed where they can't move. Like I couldn't even roll over, and it was sudden and it was unexplained. The doctors had no idea why I was paralyzed or if I would ever walk again. So that was that moment that I remember in the first 3 days, it was like there was a darkness that was settling over me. As each day passed, it would become more and more severe. And that darkness was like threatening my sanity, because it was too much. It was just such a shock. And the unknowing, the mystery of it all was just an incredible shock. And so that was that moment. It was probably within the third or fourth day when the morphine started wearing off. Morphine is bad for me. I saw bugs. Fluorescent green and pink bugs. Praying mantises, and yeah. I wrote about this in my memoir that's coming out later this year, because I had to write about this experience. I had to. I needed to get that out of my system. But it was in that moment, the darkest moment. It was at night when everyone had left, where I was like, there was like a definite line. It was almost like a line comparable to the paralysis, where like on my waist, there above, you could feel like I existed. Below, it was like I disappeared. If I was under a cover, it was like the rest of my body was not there. And so like this moment of sanity, it was like above there was sanity, below there was darkness that I would never return from, and I was sinking slower, more and more towards that darkness. And there was that moment where I got to that line, and I knew I had to do something. If I didn't do something, I would sink and not return. And what I did was I had a copy of Isaac Asimov's I, Robot, and it was the paperback, and it was the one with the robot on the front, like it had a giant robot on the front. I remember that. And I was in too much pain to read it, so I picked up a pen and I started writing on the edges, and I started writing these little stories. And one of those stories was about a woman who could fly, and you know, when you look back, it makes psychological sense that when you can't walk, when you can fly, you don't have to walk. So that was really, it was in that moment where I started writing, because to make a long story short, I had to relearn how to walk, literally, because the sensations slowly started returning and they still don't know why. And I went through all this physical therapy, relearned how to walk over 3 months, returned to U of I, a different person in a lot of ways, because I'd been through this really dark, difficult time, but I also returned writing. I also returned like storytelling, and there was something about the storytelling. It was the physical act of writing. There's that, and I keep talking about this, the black line, like the black line and following that line with your eyes. So there was that. And then there's also the telling of it. This telling of the story wasn't an escape as much as it was kind of like an internal exploration. And the internal was huge. So for me, that was what kind of, those two things were what saved me. But I returned telling these stories. And so from that point on, it was like I ended up changing my major, and I was writing. I took a creative writing class that next semester because this one guy who I was interested in, who I was totally obsessed with, he was a theater major, and he said, he looked at my writings, and he was like, these are really good. You should take a creative writing class. And I had no idea what creative writing was, and I only took the class because he said to take the class. And he still tries to take credit for my writing career. Yes, to this day. And so I took that creative writing class, and that opened up the world to me. By the next semester, I was writing what I would learn was a novel. It was a story that would not end. And so, yeah, that's usually how novels are. So it was like, so once I started writing, I knew I had discovered two things. I had discovered something that I was really good at and something that I loved doing. And that combination, like there's something about me, like if I find something like that, it was like first of all, it was finding my calling. But there's also something within me, it might be the athlete in me, that when I find something like that, I hold on to it and I just do it as much as I can. And so that's what ended up I ended up changing my major. And I didn't even know how I would be a writer or really how writers do what they do. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I wanted to do this thing. I knew that I loved it, and I enjoyed it, and I couldn't stop doing it. So that was where the whole plan, making up of a plan, was thrown out the window. And I went with that planlessness because that ended up leading me where I needed to go. So when I look back, though I didn't have a plan, and though I seemed to be all over the place, I see that from the very beginning, I always had a vision. I always had a vision, and it was strong. And so when I look at all the books that I've written, I've come to call that vision two things. One of them is African Jujuism. Let me see if I can find African Jujuism, and that, like a good example is Zara the Windseeker. Also, let me see what I have. Oh, good. Oh, we're moving along. See, no plan, and it's working. So African Jujuism, it's like, I haven't really, I know the definition, but it's kind of an idea that complicates the idea of fantasy because it weaves in, this kind of storytelling weaves in real beliefs, like true beliefs. And so the Akatawitch series is very much an example of that. I'm calling it the Akatawitch series because maybe the Akata series, because Akatawitch is the first one, Akata Warrior is the second one. And let me tell you a little bit about the Akata books because they are a prime example of African Jujuism. So we have Sunny, our main character, she was born in the United States. She was born in New York to two Nigerian immigrant parents. And when she's 9 years old, she moves with her family. Her brothers were both born in Nigeria, who are her older brothers. She moves with her family back to Nigeria when she's 9, and the story starts when she's 12. So she's very culturally, I don't like to say mixed, but like she is many things. She's very fluid. For example, she speaks Igbo, but she speaks it with an American accent. She says soccer instead of football, stuff like that. So that's Sunny, and she also happens to have albinism. So, there's a whole story behind that, and I'm not going to go off on tangent because I really could. Her character was based on someone that the daughter of my mom's best friend, who was Igbo and had albinism, and she spent some time with us one summer, and there was so much. There's so much. She inspired me to write this this narrative, and there are things that she told me that I used that were true. Like with this book, the things that are, there's so much in it that you think I made up that I did not. There's so much, so much. So yeah, that brings me back to the African Judaism thing. But like, let me give you a better idea of what the story's about. So when she's 12, she moves back to Nigeria with her family and is kind of just doing her thing. And then she finds out that she's part of this secret, mystical, magical society in Nigeria. And this is not Harry Potter. Let's get that straight. This is not Harry Potter. And the leopard people, or the Ekpe Society, are real. You know, they exist. They're based off of an actual group, and you can look that up, the Ekpe Society. And she finds out she's part of that. And so that's where I'm mixing. That's where the African Jujuist aspects come in, because the Ekpe Society, there were things that I did, it exists, but there are things that I did with it where I grew it a little bit, I evolved it a little bit, I added some fantastical aspects to it. So she finds out she's part of this society, and that and she makes some friends, and then adventures ensue. That's a really bad, really bad summary, but this book is hard to describe because it's doing a lot of things on multiple levels. And one of the, I can talk about a few of the things in the story that are the African Jujuist aspects of it. For example, when she finds out she's part of this, this secret society, there are certain things that start appearing in her world. Her world becomes bigger. So there are creatures and these mystical beings that she starts to see. And one of them is called a tungwa. And she sees the tungwa is how do I describe it? It's about the size of a basketball. It's covered in skin, and it floats. And nobody knows what they are or why they exist, but they kind of just, you just deal with it. You don't have to have the answers to everything. And it kind of floats around, and then every so often, for no reason at all, or for reasons that human beings have no idea of, it will explode. And when it explodes into tufts of hair and teeth. So it kind of clacks down, right? Yeah, you'd think I made that up. I did not. My mom told me about those. There was one day where she was just talking, and she was like, yeah, in the Tungwa, we used to see so-and-so's uncle's brother's sister would see a Tungwa in the forest, and we'd all, and people would talk about it. And I'm like, what's a tungwa? And then my mom described it to me. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And my mom would describe it as like it's a normal thing. I'm like, what are you talking about? These things are in the forest? This floating around, skin balls? So, but as soon as my mom told me about that, you know me, I have the writer's ear. And I was like, oh, I got to totally put that in a story. I have to. Like, that was definitely going in the story. The name of it, the nonsensicalness of it, it was just, it's perfect. So that's just one. That's just one. And then another one is something that appears a lot in a lot of my books, including Who Fears Death, including the Binti trilogy, including Akata Witch, including Zara the Windseeker, like almost all of my stories, which are masquerades. And I hope I have pictures of them here. Oh, good. See? No plan works. Masquerades. Masquerades are manifestations of the ancestors and spirits. They're almost every African culture, and some other cultures as well, because I'm seeing some European cultures that have what I call masquerades. I'm like, those are masquerades. They are manifestations of spirits and ancestors, and they come out during different times, during different celebrations. In Nigeria, masquerading traditions are huge. They are specific to different ethnic groups. For example, the one on the far, on my right, is Ijele, and that one is the masquerade of all masquerades. When Ijele comes out, all the masquerades have to move aside and let that one in. That's the most powerful of them, and it's extremely detailed. And the masquerading tradition is okay, so they'll come out during funerals, during weddings, during births, during celebrations. They're incredible. I've been obsessed with them since I was little for a reason I will get to in a second. But they are believed to be manifestations of the spirits and the ancestors. To unmask, to come and rip off the mask of a masquerade is an abomination. It is believed that you will die soon after if you do that. It's strongly believed. And so, like, masquerades for me, and also you have to be part of a secret society to put on the masquerade costume, and when you put it on, you become the spirit or the ancestor. And so they've always been very much a central part for me culturally, because first of all, growing up, my sisters and I, my brother was too young. He's 7 years younger than me, so we started going back to Nigeria when we were very young, and so my brother missed a lot of this. But when my sisters and I, we were like 8, 9, and 10, whenever we would visit Nigeria, we would always stay in Lagos, which is, huge mega city, biggest city in Africa, crazy, crazy place. Amazing place, but crazy. And then the second half of the trip, we'd go and visit my father's and my mother's ancestral village. And it would always be around Easter or Christmas, and those were the times when the masquerades would come out. And the masquerades there in my father's village especially looked a lot like the ones on the bottom, especially the one that looks like a big bale of hay. So when we would go, we would automatically be marked because everyone would know we were the American Nigerian girls. And for that reason, they came after us. So what the masquerades would do is, they'd walk through. Some of them are majestic, some of them are clownish, some of them are violent. The violent ones are the really cool ones. But, and so they'd come, and there'd usually be like a group of people behind them with instruments, especially a flute. If you hear that flute music, you know a masquerade is coming. And a lot of times the masquerades would carry a whip. And you'd get whipped if you didn't have any money, and my sisters and I never had any money. So we would be in the village, and my parents and my aunts and uncles and everybody, because everyone would always come back to the village around the holidays. They'd be chilling on the porch, just, chilling and relaxing, and we just sprint by, and when we sprint by, the masquerades would be right behind us, sprinting after us. And they would just watch us go and just be like, okay, anyway. So that was like, those experiences, because those masquerades were terrifying, but they were exhilarating. There was one time where they did catch us, because my sisters and I, we were very fast, because we were athletes, so they never would catch us. But there was one time where one of my oldest sister, she took a wrong turn, led us into a corner, and we got whipped. It was so pathetic. I mean, it sounds terrifying, but we remember it with it was funny. It was really funny. And that one I remember looked like that one, the bale of hay thing. So it's like, I always like to think about, when we outran the masquerades, we outran the spirits. So it's like the various types of masquerades and also the energy and the theatrics that they would bring to the room always stayed with me. And there was definitely an energy, like a strong energy, especially when it was one of the really big ones. Some of them are like the Ijele masquerade can be very enormous, and then some of the ones that looks like a bale of hay, some of those can be really big. And there's one that comes out especially at funerals. If it's the funeral of a big man, like a wealthy man, it's always a man, but. If there's a funeral of a wealthy man, there's a certain masquerade that, especially with the Igbos, that would come out, and just the energy that they would bring, the energy in the vicinity that would ripple through, would always be something I would remember. Even before I was a writer, I was like just gathering all of this, and so when I sat down to write, it was natural for the masquerades to just appear. And when I write about them, I would write about them in the way that I saw them, and the way that they felt to me when they came into the room. And so that's that African Jujuism aspect. Now, I want to also focus on another aspect of what I write, which is African futurism. And so a scholar, a scholar, a scholar, graphic novelist, professor friend of mine said that I coined the term African futurism. Yeah. So he says that. I don't know if I did. I might have. I don't really care if I did, but that's what I like to call what I do. It's a little different from Afrofuturism, though it's certainly closely related. African futurism to me has a global feel. Its foundation is more firmly based in the continent, and it aggressively extends outward. But I'm not going to spend too much time defining the term. I think that it's easier for me to give an understanding of it by giving examples. So what I want to do is I want to read a little bit of Who Fears Death, just to give an example of that. And I think I have a cover here. Do I? Oh, okay, moving right along. Great. Okay, so I want to read the beginning of Who Fears Death. Now, Who Fears Death, I'll talk a little bit about this little bit that I'm going to read when I finish, because this beginning is something to me. So the beginning, let's see, yeah. Part 1, Becoming. Chapter 1, My Father's Face. My life fell apart when I was 16. Papa died. He had such a strong heart, yet he died. Was it the heat and smoke from his blacksmithing shop? It's true that nothing could take him from his work, his art. He loved to make the metal bend and obey him, but his work only seemed to strengthen him. He was so happy in his shop. So what was it that killed him? To this day, I can't be sure. I hope it had nothing to do with me or what I did back then. Immediately after he died, my mother came running out of their bedroom, sobbing and throwing herself against the wall. I knew then that I would be different. I knew in that moment that I would never again be able to fully control the fire inside me. I became a different creature that day, not so human. Everything that happened later, I now understand, started then. The ceremony was held on the outskirt of town, before the sand dunes. It was the middle of the day and terribly hot. His body lay on thick white cloth, surrounded by a garland of braided palm fronds. I knelt there in the sand before his body, saying my last goodbye. I'll never forget his face. It didn't look like Papa's anymore. Papa's skin was dark brown. His lips were full. This face had sunken cheeks, deflated lips, and skin like gray-brown paper. Papa's spirit had gone elsewhere. The back of my neck prickled. My white veil was a poor protection from people's ignorant, fearful eyes. By this time, everyone was always watching me. I clenched my jaw. Around me, women were on their knees, weeping and wailing. Papa was dearly loved, despite the fact that he'd married my mother, a woman with a daughter like me, an Ewu daughter. That had long been excused as one of those mistakes even the greatest man can make. Over the wailing, I heard my mother's soft whimper. She had suffered the greatest loss. It was her turn to have her moment. Afterwards, they'd take him for cremation. I looked down at his face one last time. I'll never see you again, I thought. I wasn't ready. I blinked and touched my chest. That's when it happened, when I touched my chest. At first, it felt like an itchy tingle, and it quickly swelled to something more. The more I tried to get up, the more intense it got, and the more my grief expanded. They can't take him, I thought frantically. There's still so much metal left in his shop. He hasn't finished his work. The sensation spread through my chest and radiated out of the rest of my body. I rounded my shoulders to hold it in. Then I started pulling it from people around me. I shuddered and gnashed my teeth. I was filling with rage. Oh no, not here, I thought. Not at Papa's ceremony. Life wouldn't leave me alone long enough to even mourn my dead father. Behind me, the wailing stopped. All I heard was the gentle breeze. It was utterly eerie. Something was beneath me, in the ground or maybe somewhere else. Suddenly, I was slammed with the pained emotions of everyone around me for Papa. On instinct, I laid my hands on his arm. People started screaming. I didn't turn around. I was too focused on what I had to do. Nobody tried to pull me away. No one touched me. My friend Luyu's uncle was once struck by lightning during a rare dry season Ungwa storm. He survived, but he couldn't stop talking about how it felt like being violently shaken from the inside out. That's how I felt now. I gasped with horror. I couldn't take my hand from Papa's arm. It was fused to him. My sand-colored skin tapered to his gray-brown skin from my palm, a mound of mingled flesh. I started screaming. It caught in my throat and I coughed, and then I stared. Papa's chest was slowly moving up and down, up and down. He was breathing. I was both repulsed and desperately hopeful. I took a deep breath and cried, "Live, Papa, live!" A pair of hands settled on my wrists. I knew exactly whose they were. One of his fingers was broken and bandaged, and if he didn't get his hands off me, I'd hurt him far worse than I had 5 days prior. "Onye Songu," Aro said into my ear, quickly taking his hands from my wrists. Oh, how I hated him. But I listened. "He is gone," he said. "Let go so we can all be free of it." Somehow, I did. I let go of Papa. Everything went dead silent again, as if the world for a moment were submerged in water. Then the power that had built up inside me burst. My veil was blown off of my head, and my freed braids whipped back. Everyone and everything was thrown back. Aro, my mother, family, friends, acquaintances, strangers, the table of food, the 50 yams, the 13 large monkey bread fruits, the 5 cows, the 10 goats, the 30 hens, and so much sand. Back in town, the power went off for 30 seconds. Houses would need to be swept of sand, and the computers would be taken in for dust damage. That underwater-like silence again. I looked down at my hand, and when I tried to remove it from Papa's cold, still dead arm, there was the sound of peeling, like weak glue flaking off. My hand left a silhouette of dried mucus on Papa's arm. I rubbed my fingers together. More of the stuff crackled and peeled from between them, and I took one more look at Papa. Then I fell over to the side and passed out. That was 4 years ago. Now see me. People here know that I caused it all. They want to see my blood, they want to make me suffer, and then they want to kill me. Whatever happens after this, let me stop. Tonight, you want to know how I came to be what I am. You want to know how I got here. It's a long story, but I'll tell you. You're a fool if you believe what others say about me. I tell you my story to avert all those eyes. Thankfully, even my long story will fit on that laptop of yours. I have 2 days. I hope it's long enough. It will all catch up with me soon. My mother named me Onye Sonwu. It means who fears death. She named me well. I was born 20 years ago during troubled times. Ironically, I grew up far from all the killing. So that's the excerpt of the beginning of Who Fears Death. Whew. There's a lot to that. So Who Fears Death, that novel took me 6 years to write. It originally was 2 books, over 800, it was 800 pages. And when I showed it to my agent, and mind you, when I'm writing something, I'm not thinking about marketability at all. I never have. There are times where I wish I could, but I'm not capable. I write what comes, and that's all that I want to do. I can't write what people want to read, if that makes sense. And so Who Fears Death took me 6 years. It was originally around 800 pages. And I showed it to my agent, and this was it was published, Who Fears Death was published in 2010. So this was well before that. I can't remember how long it took to go through the editing process, but I know getting it from 800 to 389 pages took me 2 years. So when I showed it to my agent, he looked at this story and he was like, this will win awards. This is incredible. But there are two things. One, this is African, whatever you want to call it, science fiction, magical realism, a blend of all of that. And this is a rare thing. And it's 2 books. I'm like, what are you going to call that? A duology? So it's being that long and in that state, he felt that it needed to be 1 book. And he showed me this technique to bring it down. And he's like, okay, you need to bring this down into 1 book length where it's not too long, but don't change anything. I've had, challenges like this since then, and this is where I learned. It was in this one where, when he said that, where I was like, I learned a lesson, and I learned a lesson that I've used since then. I used it with Marvel as well. It was like, when he said this, it sounded impossible, and it sounded really difficult, but something in me was like, okay, that's a challenge, let me take it up. Let me see what I can do. And he showed me this technique, because my agent also writes books on writing, Donald Moss, and he showed me this technique where you look at every single word in the book and take out all of the weak phrases and make them strong words. So something that's very big would be huge. So you go through the whole thing and do that, and you're looking at the words. And so I did that with Who Fears Death. Like, I remember I took the whole manuscript, printed it out, threw it on the ground, and then took each page out of order and went through each of those and did that. That took me 2 years. And I also took out almost every single inner thought because I realized that most of the inner thoughts in the story were unnecessary. They were already, it was a given. So I let the story speak for itself. And so yeah, that took me 2 years and got it down to 389 pages. And so for that reason, the book reads very fast. It reads very, there's no fat on it at all. So that was Who Fears Death. And when I wrote Who Fears Death, the section that I just read, that beginning, I write non-linearly. So when I'm writing something, I jump around a lot. I'll write it sort of inside out. Sometimes I write backwards. Rarely do I write from beginning, middle to end. Very rarely. And so when I'm editing, it's the same thing. So the beginning of the story, the beginning of Who Fears Death was indeed the first thing that I wrote, which is very rare. The day that I wrote it was the day after my father's passing. When my father passed, I was very angry because my father was a cardiovascular surgeon, and he was a chief of surgery in Chicago, and one of the most successful heart surgeons in the Chicago area, and he worked very, very hard. And he died of 2 things. 1, congestive heart failure, and then 2, Parkinson's. Parkinson's makes your hand shake. And if you take a surgeon and make his hand shake, that's like taking his art. So I had to witness that, and it was very difficult. And so when he passed, and it was like over a 5-year period, and I remember I was home at the time, and so when he passed, like I once again was at a place where I couldn't deal with it. And one thing I've done since I started writing, when I'm in pain, I write. And it was the night of his wake keeping. He had his wake keeping here in the United States in Illinois, and he was later buried in Nigeria. And it was at the wake keeping, I was just a mess the whole time. And near the end, somehow I found myself in the room with his body, alone. And that, I remember looking down and thinking, that doesn't look like him anymore. And like, just all the rage that I was feeling coming into me, and it felt like it was coming from the ground, and it was just, it felt like something that would destroy everything in that room. And I remember at some point my sister and my mom coming in there and taking me out of that room. And it was in that evening that I sat down and just started writing. I didn't know who Onyesunwu was. Her name was not Onyesunwu at the time. I didn't know who this character was. I didn't know what this story was. I didn't know what I was writing. I didn't know if it was a novel, a short story. I didn't care. I just wrote. And the first thing that I wrote was what I just read to you. And then over the years of editing and moving the thing around, because I edited that thing, Who Fears Death was the one that I edited the most. And like the beginning moved around, it moved to the middle, it moved to the end at one point, and then it moved back to the beginning, and that's where it was right. It was right for it to be there. And so like that moment the moment where she's looking down at her father, that was me, that was me. And then at some point it jumps and becomes Onyesunwu. Another thing I can tell you about the title of Who Fears Death, it's interesting because I was writing it, and then at one point we went to Nigeria, and my cousin was getting married, and I met her, at that time I met her fiance, and I was talking to him, and I was like, oh yeah, what's your last name? And he told me it was Onyesunwu. And I was like, and there's something, in Igbo culture, there are these names, if it has Onwu in it, those tend to be, Onwu means death, right? So my writer's ear listens out for that. And so when I heard that in his name, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that must be, okay, I can't explain what Obanjes are, but it's, yeah. Obanje are children who are, it's too much to explain. Just Google it. Chinua Achebe deals with them too. Google it. But like children are given these names that are supposed to scare death away. And those names have the word death in it. So when he said that name, I was really anxious. I'm like, oh my God, I need to know what your name means. And then he told me, he said, Who Fears Death? And, my writer's ear once again was like, oh, I just got the title to my novel. Like I knew I had my character's name, and I knew that I had the title to my novel. I originally really wanted to name it Onyesunwu, but I knew most people wouldn't be able to pronounce that, where the book would be published first. So I just named it the definition of her name. So that's where that came from. I guess I could talk about a little bit about the HBO, how that happened. So Who Fears Death is my third book. It's my first adult novel. Who Fears Death goes dark. That one goes dark for obvious reasons of what I was dealing with. And when I started writing it, all of these other issues, you've got issues of female genital mutilation in there, you've got child soldiers, you've got genocide, all these, and I did not mean to throw in like every single dark thing that I could think of in one book. It was just, when I was writing it, those are what came through. That's, I was channeling Biafra, I was looking at Sudan, I was just a lot of things, and then pain and darkness, stories of women around me, it was just a lot of that. And so the book is dark, I will say that. The book is dark, but it always maintains hope. It always keeps hope. Hope is the soul of the book, even when it goes really dark. And there are also funny moments as well. But like, okay, so with HBO, it's interesting because they kind of just showed up in my inbox one day. It wasn't like my agents were showing it, shopping it around or anything like that. It was, so Who Fears Death went on to win the World Fantasy Award. And I was the first, I don't know if I was the first person of color, I might have been, but at least the first black author to win the World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. So that was a really big deal. And, yeah, you can write. And so I think I think it was reviewed in the LA Times, and an executive from HBO went out and read the thing. And, and yeah, they just kind of dropped into my inbox. It wasn't like there was no back and forth with agents and stuff. And I remember seeing it and thinking, what is going on here? And it was a very high up executive who I think just got even higher today. But yeah, and so that started she was like, I love Who Fears Death. I love your writing. I love your voice. And that started, we started talking. And so the optioning of Who Fears Death by HBO did not happen immediately. This was back she reached out to me back in 2000, I think it was either 2010 or 2011. This was years ago. And I guess I could talk about this now. It's fine. There are a lot of things you just can't, but I'm going to, whatever. There are other things. Okay, so I'll even back it up since I'm talking about this. I've gone off on a completely different tangent, but whatever, I'm going to talk about this. So Who Fears Death was originally, well, not originally, but it was optioned first by an executive producer for it to be a film, right? And I can say this, that Whoopi Goldberg was really interested. She loved Who Fears Death. She loved Who Fears Death and Akata Witch. And she was really excited about it. This was back in 2011. She was really excited about it. Now remember that year, because that wasn't that long ago, and how much has changed till now. So yeah, so she was really excited about it, and she took it to some major networks that I won't name. And all of them said this to her. They said, "This is African science fiction. We don't do that." Those exact words. Those exact words. Whoopi was shocked. I was not. I was not shocked at all. That was what I expected. It's always been a battle. The gatekeepers are real. Still are. So that was the experience with it when it was optioned as a film. And then that option ran out, and then HBO came along, and there was a back and forth because they knew that Who Fears Death it's not a commercial book. It is very much it's very much its own thing. There's like no template to follow, and a lot of times when there is no template to follow, that's a harder path. I mean, it's great to be the first of something, but I'll tell you, as someone who's been the first of things, no, it's not. You want to be the second. You want to be second. First, you get all the hardships, and you have to beat the path. You have to beat the path, and sometimes when you're beating the path, you get tired halfway through. So yeah, Who Fears Death was very much like that, and they knew it. They knew this at HBO, and so they had to figure out, like, when they came to me initially, they knew it wasn't the right time to option it, but they really, really wanted me. They wanted to pull me in, and so there were, I think it was maybe 3 years, over 3 years, where they were trying to get me to write. They wanted to get me in the writer's room, at least, so once you get those credentials, then you can do things from the inside. And it was The Leftovers that they wanted me to write for, and I really wanted to do that, but I was teaching at the University at Buffalo at the time, and I couldn't drop everything and move to LA for how many months and focus only on that. And so that didn't happen. And then somehow it just all came together. It all came together very quickly, where they were ready to option it, and then it just happened. So it wasn't an immediate thing. And so now we're in the process of working on the script for the pilot, and it's tough because, like, you can I want to be involved, like all the things that I have in development, I want to be involved. I could easily step back and just let whoever do whatever they're going to do with it, but I know, well, there are two things. One, I'm not in it for that. There are writers who are in it for the money, and more power to them. But for me, I'm in it for more than that, and I know that I have to be involved for this to be done right, correctly, and so there's that. But it also has to. It's a gradual thing, and it's not an easy book to adapt, and so we're taking our time with it, and that's fine. And there are other hurdles, but. Yeah, I'll stop talking now. Okay, so moving on. So aside from Who Fears Death, so after Who Fears Death, there's another series that I want to talk a little bit about. Wait, that's not it. Oh. Okay, fine. Okay, so this is a story that you can read for free online at Slate Magazine. It's called Mother of Invention. Oh, Lord. This is God, I need to take this out. I don't know why I keep leaving. I mean, I love the illustration. It's perfect. This is exactly what I was imagining. But Mother of Invention is a science fiction story that I wrote. There was a retreat that we did where they had a bunch of us science fiction writers at the University of Phoenix. They took us into the desert for a night, and we talked, and then they introduced us each of us to different researchers who we want, and depending on like what the story that we were incubating was about. And we ended up coming up with stories, and then they put all those stories in an anthology called Years Winter. Oh God, Mary Shelley was. God, I'm forgetting. It's winter. It has winter in it. And I feel badly right now. Year Without Winter. That's it. Year Without Winter. That's what the anthology is called. And then Slate Magazine published my story. And my story was about a smart home. It's set in Nigeria, in a near future Nigeria. We have a woman she was with a man, and they're having a child, and then she finds out he's married, and he's just left her. And so she's kind of pissed. And she's living in a smart home that he built. Right, and it's God. There's a lot. It's set like I said, it's set in the near future. Oil is no longer the biggest export in Nigeria. Now it's periwinkle grass, which I love periwinkle. That's my favorite color. So there, periwinkle grass, which is a super grass that produces this grain that is cheaper and tastier than rice, and rice is extinct in this story. So. This was from there's like a tutorial kind of thing. And because of this grass which grows all over Nigeria, there are now pollen tsunamis. Yeah, and people have allergies. So yeah, that's what the story. And the smart home is slowly building on itself. And our main character is too preoccupied with her pregnancy and her relationship problems to realize that her smart home is building on itself. So that's the premise. It's called Mother of Invention. And yeah, there's a lot. It's a lot of story. This was This was like a sort of like Clippy. You know Clippy from Microsoft Word? Yeah, that guy's like Clippy. And those are the periwinkle flowers. And I described them like that too, and yeah. And there was an animator who illustrated it, and she did a really wonderful job. She's awesome, and and you can read that in Slate Magazine. Just put Nettie and then Mother of Invention, and it will pop right up. I'm not much of a short story writer, but every so often I'll write a really good one. That's a really good one. So what I wanted to talk about, not Lagoon, Binti. There we go. Binti. Now, Binti is special to me. Binti is another example of what I'm calling African futurism. Let me see, do I have Himba people? Yeah. Okay, so our main character is Himba, and the Himba are an actual ethnic group from Namibia, and they are known for the Ojitse, you see the red clay that she's rolled into her hair and that they spread on their skin. It's called Ojitse. It's a mix of butterfat and acar in perfumes. And it's the Himba people they've always fascinated me because they're like this small, Namibia is an interesting place, first of all, especially when you look at the issue of colonialism. So we have this ethnic group who lives basically in this desert area, who still maintains this really elaborate cultural practice, and it's partially cosmetic, it's partially, because it's really nice for your skin, as you can see, really good skin. But it's also, it's a cultural practice, and there's so many, it's very elaborate, all of their headdress and everything they're wearing has meaning, and I love that, and it's an old Namibian African tradition, and I love that idea of, this tradition still being practiced, and kind of putting that against this definition of modernism, because the definition of modernism is often combined with the idea of westernization. So it's like this, this idea of taking the Himba and moving them into the future and having them still practice some of those ways just was a powerful thing to me, very powerful. And so let me see. Yeah, we'll get back to Binti. And so that led to Binti. Now, Binti is about an African girl who, Namibian Himba girl, who is a mathematical genius, and she gets into the finest university in the galaxy. And she comes from a very insular, tight-knit community and family. She practices all of the traditional ways, but she's a mathematical genius, and she secretly applies to this university, and she gets in, and she decides to go. And she has her own place in the community as well. She has her own place in her family. Her family makes these pieces of tech called astrolabes, which is linked to the, I wish I had a picture of astrolabes in here, but it's an actual old device. It's like an ancient, the real astrolabe is an ancient GPS, and so in the future, they've become like more than a smartphone. They have your whole history on them. Actually, kind of like your smartphone, but they have your whole everything on them. And they're sort of they're so technologically advanced that they're almost magical, right? And her family makes these. So you have this traditional African community that's technologically advanced. Like that was very intentional for me. And so Binti comes from that family, and so she is a harmonizer, which is someone who has this ability to use mathematics to it's almost a magical ability to call up current to create the best astrolabes. And so she's supposed to come after her father. She's supposed to take over the business and follow her father. And she gets into the finest university in the galaxy and decides to go because she feels like this is something that will evolve her. So it's not that she's leaving her family or her culture behind. It's not that at all. It's that she wants to take that, she sees a way to grow. And so that's the premise of it. And so when she leaves, she's the only Himba on the ship, on the ship that goes to this other planet. Oh, and by the way, this university, this galactic university, is only 2% human. So we got aliens. Yes. And so she decides to go. And when she goes, she brings everything with her. She brings her culture. She goes in her traditional dress because that's what she does. She doesn't feel like she has to change, but she wants to go. And when she goes, some things happen. Things don't go exactly, to say the least, exactly the way that she expects them to go. And that's also part of the journey. So that's what Binti is about. So yeah, I'm out of time. Boy, do I talk a lot. I didn't even get to talk about the Marvel stuff. Oh, there's so much. But yeah, I want to open it up for questions because I'm a professor and I could talk for like 3 hours and still be fine. But yeah, I want to open it up for questions and hear what you guys have to say. If there are no questions, I can keep going. Yes? Yes. The question is, did my love of bugs influence the character designs for the aliens in Binti? Yes. I mean, how could they not? I mean, like, insects have, it's not, well, insects are earthlings too, but there's just so much creativity in the insect world. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about the insect world is that in these tiny, if you take a magnifying glass and just look at things up close, there are worlds. And I'm utterly fascinated by that. And yeah, so when I started imagining the various types of aliens, and I like the idea of aliens that are truly alien, like diverse. So you have the ones that are like insects, but you also have aliens that exist on a different, like you might not be able to see them. You'd need to wear like ultraviolet glasses to see them. Those kind of things, like aliens that are different, not just metaphors for human beings, in other words, like truly alien. But yes, yes, yes. Possibly. Okay, so the question was, okay, how do I describe the question? There's a moment in Akata Witch where our main character, Sunny, when she was little, she got sick and she had malaria. And when she had malaria, she saw there was a light that kind of hovered above her until she got better. And you were asking if that was influenced by, what was it, the things that I dealt with when I was, like my experiences when I was paralyzed. Possibly because that experience is always with me at all times. I wake up every day with that experience. It's not that I wake up thinking, woe is me. It's just an awareness, a constant awareness. So when you're writing, at least for me, when I'm writing, I'm pulling from within all the time. And so that when I'm pulling within, it's always going to go through that not film, like forgetting the word. Oh, I want the word. I'm forgetting it. But like it's always going to go through that experience. So that experience will always color and infect and affect whatever I write. So there's that. But a lot of that also came from just stories of malaria. My sister had malaria at one point, and she described like the shivers and just that otherworldly feeling, and I kind of drew from that. And some of the other stories that I heard about malaria, like my parents, just that seeing things, seeing things when you're in the throes of it. So I worked that in as well. Yeah. Yes.
Just because I follow you on Twitter.
Uh-oh.
Down that road, but I think you've spent a little bit of time down in Santa Fe with George.
Yes.
Have you been able to spend enough time to experience that Native American culture? And I'd be curious to find out how much maybe you've been able to grab from that, and how you maybe see yourself using it with your experiences from your African.
Yeah. Every time I've gone to Santa Fe, the jewelry is incredible. Oh my
By the way,
God.
quick question, red or green?
Both. Both. It's gosh, Native American culture and Aboriginal culture, Australian, those two are two that they're, it's not that I sit and study them, not so much, but like I do take from them. I do, like, and when I've been in Santa Fe, yes, I have, as much as I can, because I haven't gotten to spend a lot of time there, but I've been multiple times, mainly because of George, and gotten to kind of absorb some of the stories that I hear from there, and also, yeah, at one point I spoke at a school, and yeah, so I definitely draw from Native American culture. I think one of the places where I see like a really interesting meeting is in the jewelry, though. Like there's like this one. I actually got this one from Santa Fe, and the beadwork. The beadwork is almost, I wouldn't say, the designs are different, but the beadwork is almost otherwise identical to like Maasai jewelry, especially, and then some of the beadwork that I see the Fulani people, like there's like, and I still can't figure out where that intersection, I've been searching, because I'm like, there's got to be something that has brought these together. And then also the masquerade tradition. There's, I forget the name of it in Native American culture, but like the energy is the same. The energy is the same. Even when I watch the videos, the energy is definitely there. So yeah, definitely. I take from that, but sometimes I don't know if it's conscious or not. But like, those are things that I'm definitely interested in. And those are things that I notice. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. That's a very good question. One of the reasons why, like, Who Fears Death, I would not allow to be optioned anywhere, just anywhere. Like, that's one where I'm like, you can throw whatever amount of money at me, I'm not allowing that. Like, I'm cool. Like, I don't need all of that. And so it's like, especially right now, there is a hunger for African stories, like African fantastical stories and science. There's a hunger for it. Sometimes that hunger is not sincere. I question it. I'm very skeptical of it. And this idea of whitewashing, there's always that fear for me. Who Fears Death is the first thing that I've had optioned, right? The first thing that I've had optioned by like a big, network. And there are some things that I think I would do differently the next time around, and there is a next time, and I've done things differently. Like I've done things, and I can't wait till I can talk about that. But one thing with HBO, though, like I knew HBO was a good place for Who Fears Death, because one, they take risks, and two, they're not. Let me be careful with that. I have confidence in them. I don't know of too many other networks where I would allow that. And this idea of whitewashing is the fear of whitewashing is real. The reason why it happens is purely about money. It's about marketing. It's also, in my opinion, it's about controlling the narrative. And the whitewashing isn't just necessarily in the main character. It could be in the side character. It could be in the love interest. There are all kinds of sneaky ways where that can happen. And that's why, like, I've had interest in almost all of my books, like from really solid places. But I'm only one person, and I can only put in so much time. I've actually had to turn down TV options, like for really solid from really solid networks, because I knew I couldn't allow the optioning to happen without me being deeply involved. I mean, like really, really involved. You can only do so much. So that's something for, at least for me, I understand the artists and writers who are okay with letting others do whatever they want to do as long as they get their big check. I understand that. I'm not judging. But I know for me, I am very much about controlling what happens, you know, because that fear of whitewashing is very, very real. And the way it happens is it's not that one person decides. It's that there are lots of people involved, and then the money people come in and they get involved, and then they start doing things and saying things, and then things get muddled. And once they get muddled, then they get more muddled. And it's just, I've seen how it happens. I know how it happens. And so, like, when you see, for example, the film Black Panther was not perfect. I have my criticisms of that film. But that film was a feat in itself. Like, there's certain things that film did that have never been done. Two, there must have been some epic battles that happened for that to happen. Like, epic. So, you know, I look at films like Moonlight, and like, you know, epic battles happened for those to exist, and I don't think that's acknowledged or understood enough. And it's fine that the average person has no idea what goes on behind closed doors, but just understand that the depth and the amount of obstacles for either TV or film are huge. They are huge, and the fight is real. And the things that don't get made, don't just dismiss those things that don't get made, because a lot of battles have been fought and won, even for them to get to a certain place. So it's like, just be aware. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. Oh, my blood pressure just went way up. Yes. Hello. Mm-hmm.
Politically, socially chaotic. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about what is now possible in 2019 that wasn't possible in 2011, and just kind of bring
Yeah.
us into what you're experiencing on your end?
I want to first say that nothing is impossible. Like, doesn't matter what year it is, nothing, because that's how, when I started writing, I didn't think about any of this stuff. Even though there were all these problems, I just jumped right in and didn't even care, and wrote my stories and just pushed forward, no matter what. It wasn't a worry. I mean, I knew those things were out there. I grew up around racism. I grew up around all of that, like serious racism. South Holland, Illinois, 80s, my God. But that, I never felt a need to not tell, like, telling my story was such a powerful thing. So I want to preface that. Always tell your story, always. But as far as what's possible now that wasn't possible, like, let's say even back in 2010, there's an interest. Like, there's an interest, like, back in 2010, the things that were considered a risk are considered marketable right now. For now, though. Like, it won't, things will not continue to evolve. I'm talking about people of color, I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about all kinds, all the isms, like all the peoples, because I don't want to forget anybody. Like, the things that were considered a risk a few years ago are of interest right now. For them to remain of interest in the future, those who are creatives need to do their job. You need to work. Like, that's, so like right now there's a wave, and you need to jump on the wave, because it's not going to be there unless you keep pushing it. So I think that a lot more is possible. Like, I often think about, like, when I had my first novel published back in 2005, oh my gosh, Zara the Windseeker, which is a blend of science fiction and fantasy, and it's rooted in Nigeria's technologically advanced biotech, all this stuff, in a young adult novel with a girl who could fly. In 2005, they didn't know what to do with that. Like they didn't know what to do with it. Reviewers were perplexed, everyone was perplexed, and if that were published now, the reception would be completely different. There's a comfort, there's an interest, there's a things aren't perfect, of course. We're still developing, but that sense of normalcy is starting to emerge, and that's a huge, that's huge. Like the idea that, oh, you know, this kind of story that's a little different from this kind of story is normal and it's okay. I think that's the main thing that I've seen, and I've been doing this long enough where I've been able to see the change, and it's only been in a few years I see the change, and it's a wonderful thing. Sometimes I feel frustrated because I'm like, man, if I'd only just waited. Just waited, but everyone has their own paths. But yeah, I think a lot more is possible now, but it's not perfect. There are certain things to look out for. I can go off on a tangent with that, but I won't, so I'll stop talking. Yes. Yes.
So with like your increased like responsibilities and like projects, what is your writing process look like now? Do you only write when you're inspired, or how do you
What does my writing process look like now? It's chaos. Everything with me is chaos. It's glorious chaos. I don't write only when I'm inspired. That's one thing about comics. There, I can talk about comics now. I've learned, that's one of the biggest things I've learned with comics is like how to generate a story. Because with comics are very different from, let's say, novel writing. Novel writing, you can spread out, you can take your time. I could take 6 years to write a book, it's fine. With comics, it's boom, 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 it's fast. Like immediately. With Marvel once again dropped into my inbox. And that's how that happened. But once you decide, once you say yes to a project, it's not like you can just sit back and think about it. Okay, they're going to expect a summary for you like in a week. So you have to learn how to do that. And so what if you're not inspired? So I've learned how to push the inspiration. And one thing I always tell new writers is not to wait for the flash of inspiration. Sometimes you have to write yourself into it. You just write, and then it comes. So with comics, that's how it's been. I've learned how to create a story in a short period of time when I have nothing, create something from nothing. I've learned that. But in general, my writing routine is very chaotic. I'm always writing. It's full. When I go to my hotel room, I'm going to write. I have many different projects that I'm juggling, many, and they're all different. Some of them are comics. Some of them are, I'm working on 2 novels, one novel that's brand new, one that I'm in the editing process of, and then I have the TV stuff, which is a different type of writing as well. Then I have a journalistic piece that I'm working on, which is really elaborate and very cool, but they're all different types of writing. So it's like, I can't say there's an order to it, but I always get it done. No plan, always get it done though. Yes, in the back. Yeah. Yeah. I do. It's really weird. I do sleep. I do sleep 8 hours a day at least, and I don't know. I really don't. I don't know. I have to figure it out because it's like I'm working on this novel. Just came out of nowhere. It's not even on contract or anything. I have all this other stuff, but it just came out of nowhere, and I was writing it, and I've written 90 pages. I don't know how I did that, and yeah, and I often wonder, like with the Marvel stuff, because the deadlines are so fast, And so I try to analyze myself and be like, okay, how do I do this? How did I get this done? But then I don't remember because it's so fast and I can't remember. But I do know that being an athlete is a big part of it. Like, that is the foundation, because back in my tennis days, there was a discipline. There's like a discipline that you had to have in practicing, in always following through, and like relentless. So it was like, you don't, I do, there are times where I do procrastinate a little bit, but mainly I don't. I just kind of, yeah. I'm not even making any sense, but I don't really know. It's a lot, but I get it done. And I feel like I no longer worry that I won't, because I always get it done. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I do. I think that there are two things. The Nigerian American aspect, which I haven't talked a lot about, there's a hybridization that goes on there that, one, allows me to view things from the inside outside, if that makes sense. So like the fantastical and the mystical aspect, like the African mysticism and cosmologies, whenever we would go to Nigeria, because I'm coming from being born and raised in the United States, I'd get there, and when I'd see masquerades, or when I would hear about Nsibidi, or when I would hear about these mystical practices, when I'd see them, they'd be new to me. Two, I'd lack stigma. There would be no stigma around it. It would just be what it is, you know. And so therefore, I could be curious, because like with Akata Witch and Who Fears Death, those two, man, they wouldn't publish Who Fears Death in Nigeria for years. They only published it recently because once it got optioned by HBO, they're like, oh, okay. But yeah, I know, I'm still salty, you know. But like when it first came out, they were none of the publishers would touch it. They were like, this is going to cause riots, because they knew that in Who Fears Death there are mystical practices and items and beings that are in Who Fears Death that people believe in and that people recognize. And I knew I was playing with fire. I knew what I was doing. That I knew. I'm like, okay. But I'm not, I'm adventurous like that. So, but I knew what I was doing, but like, so when they look at it, there's a stigma around those things. Like there are certain creatures that show up in Who Fears Death and in Akata Witch that there's a strong stigma around. And if I were not Nigerian American, if I were just Nigerian and was born and raised in Nigeria, I wouldn't touch those things. I would not be able to touch those things. I would be terrified of them. I would be afraid of how they would affect my own life, because, you know, when you dabble in these things, they dabble back at you, you know. But for me, being Nigerian American, I lacked that fear. You might call it stupidity. Some call it stupidity. But like I lacked that. And so therefore I could have that interest and be obsessed and then write about them in these intricate ways that bring them even more to life. So yeah, the Nigerian American aspect, very much so, played a role in what I write and how I write about it. And also the fearlessness that I write about it with. Like, there's no time when I'm writing about these things where I'm like, oh, am I going to get this wrong, or am I going to offend somebody? Because it's like I'm writing about my own culture, and I'm directly connected to it. So that doesn't cross my mind, and I know it well. I've grown up with it. It's part of me. So like, yeah, the Nigerian American aspect, that's big. That's very significant in also why I write science fiction. I haven't talked much about how I started writing science fiction. It wasn't because I was reading classic Western science fiction. It was my trips to Nigeria, and I look around and I see technology here, and it's manifesting itself in a way that is not that I'm not seeing in literature and that I'm not seeing in the United States, and I wanted to write about that. That's why I started writing science fiction. It wasn't because I was following anything that was that I had previously read. So it's like, yeah, that Nigerian American aspect is really strong. Okay, one more question? Yeah. Yes.
Can you speak to the relationships that you have with the characters? Like, how do they show up in your imagination consciousness? Like, what's that like? And do they speak to you frequently? How do you know which ones are stories? How do your characters show up in your
Yeah, the question is, how do I relate to the characters that I write about? The characters that I write about are very strong. I'm one of those, and if I were in Nigeria, I wouldn't say this out loud. I'm one of those who hears voices. I hear my characters. My characters speak to me. Onisonwu spoke to me. Onisonwu was scary. She was scary. In the Book of Phoenix, which is the prequel, loose prequel to Who Fears Death, the main character, Phoenix Okore, spoke to me. Like, she spoke to me so strongly that there was one time where I was tired, I wanted to take a nap, and I just wanted to take a break from writing, and I did. I went to take a nap, and in my nap, I heard her saying, "Get up, I'm not done talking." She was like that. She was mean, too. Binti is very soft and kind and polite. Zara was very playful. Sunny is forceful. Sunny is forceful, but she's not mean. So like each of my characters, I hear them, I talk about them like they're, like there's someone standing next to me, like I could call them up and have a conversation with them in a way that I can. Yeah, but they're very, very real to me. The first thing that comes to me when I'm writing are the characters. The characters come first because a character, like a plot is different depending on the character. Like if the plot is someone runs and jumps off a cliff, if it's Zara, she'll fly. If it's Phoenix, who knows what will happen with her. It depends, like the way that the character would jump off the cliff would depend on the character. So the character is always comes first. But like, it's a knowing of the character, and that's one of my favorite things about writing these stories. And I love writing in first person. That's one of my favorite forms of writing because like I can really. It's not that you can get close to the character in third, but there's something about first person that is really intoxicating for me. But yeah, my characters are always very very strong. Like I know them. I know them. I don't have to do like character profiles or anything like that because I know them as a whole. They're not two-dimensional. Yeah. One more question. Have we run out of time or? Okay, we've run out of time. Thank you, everybody. This has been great.